Ladies and gentlemen, Redmayne and Felicity Jones. I'm going to call them out again. Lisa Bruce. And right after we go into the Wow, okay. I think I'll start this one off while you guys just get seated. First question for Eddie. This is an outstanding performance, one I imagine most actors dream of. Can you just tell us about how you prepared for the role?
Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking you guys. That was the most generous response. This was a passion project for all of us, and we care very much about the film, and we care very much about the Hawking family, and we were so terrified you guys seeing it, letting it out into the world, and so thank you. Toronto is an incredibly generous place, so that means a lot to us. Thank you. As you said, this is playing a part like Stephen Hawking, who is an icon and a genius and one of the funniest men I've ever met, is what we dream of. James was generous enough to give me that opportunity. And it was one of the most extraordinary, terrifying, and brilliantly inspiring experiences of my life.
Okay, I'm going to throw it out to you guys. Is there a question out there? Yes, just in front.
Maybe more fearful or a little bit stronger inside in the face of something like that?
So the question was about learning about this type of disease, and in preparing for the role, do you find that it made you more scared of potentially something like that happening, or gave you more strength to potentially face it?
I think 100% more strength throughout the whole process of making this film. We came across people with the most profound humanity who were going through terribly difficult, demanding situations. The disease is devastating. There's no other word for it. It is so difficult, but the humour you see, the people who are looking after people who have motor neurone disease, the people suffering from it, you see real human strength. And I think for all of us that it was inspiring from start to finish.
Okay, so another question in the audience. Okay, yes, in front.
Just wondering what advice, if any, you received from your real-life counterparts.
Did you receive any advice from Jane and Stephen?
We did. We spent 5 or 6 months preparing for this film, and I'd done as much research as you could possibly imagine, watched every single documentary, attempted to read and comprehend as much as I possibly could of his work, which is not very much. And it was this extraordinary moment when 5 days before filming, Fliss and I went and had dinner with Jane and Jonathan and Timothy, their youngest child, and then spent the afternoon with Stephen. And I went in genuinely petrified, and I basically spent the first 25 minutes vomiting forth information about Stephen Hawking to Stephen Hawking. And it was pretty terrifying, and it got so bad, and I suffer from verbal diarrhea, and so I was really struggling to fill the pauses, and I ended up saying, of course, Stephen, you were born on the 8th of January, which was Galileo's birthday, and I was actually born on the 6th of January, so we're both Capricorns. And there was this horrific long pause, and about 3 minutes later, Stephen said in his iconic voice, "I am an astronomer, not an astrologer." That was my introduction to Stephen. After that, it got much better, and we learned a lot from him.
I don't know quite how to follow that. So, it was meeting Jane. Jane is the most incredibly tenacious woman. She was so committed to the film and so sort of generous with her time and energy. And I went to meet her. And there was a moment when she came to answer the door, I went to have dinner, and we just sort of looked at each other when she opened the door and sort of thought, this is really surreal. So I'm going to be playing you, and now we're going to have a conversation. This is all very, very bizarre for both of us. But it was just the humanity of Jane, and when you meet her immediately, you feel that there's a warmth to her, and in some way I wanted to capture her essence.
I'm going to ask a question for James. What inspired you to get attached to this project, and how did you go about casting these two wonderful actors?
Well, it was this gentleman down here who wrote a screenplay that I was sent, and I thought I knew the story of Stephen. I was familiar with the iconic Stephen Hawking, but then I discovered writing a screenplay how much I didn't know, this sort of personal, intimate story, and that felt like very good territory, very emotionally complicated territory for me to dive into. And I met Eddie very early on in this process, and once I'd met him, he was sort of on fire for this. And he also knew the responsibility that we were taking on was very daunting, and we were both fearful, and fear makes you work. And by God, he worked. Once I'd met Eddie, I was pretty certain that I wanted to work with him to convince this man, who wasn't very hard to convince. That Eddie was the right person. Likewise with Felicity, and then we brought them together and saw how well they were going to work off of each other, which is really how actors should work, in a sort of organic way with each other. So it really wasn't difficult. The casting part was easy. The work that then had to happen was the tough part.
Okay, is there another question out there in the audience? Here about me? Yes, you're waving in the balcony. Go for it.
What a beautifully constructed and elegant story about Stephen Hawking. And obviously his story is very much about scientific discovery and endeavor, but it's also very much a story about human relationships and personal resilience and struggle. So I wondered, how did you go about in the film constructing an equal balance without being too jargony with the science, but maintaining that relationship?
I think Anthony should ask that. He constructed the screenplay.
Thank you. I think the world waited a very long time to find a symbol for scientific genius to rival Einstein's hair. And with the advent of Professor Hawking with that voice and that wheelchair, we had our symbol for scientific genius, but also I think for hope and determination. And so I came to it through my fascination with that man. But I read Jane's book, which showed me, and she told me personally, she said, the one thing I want you to remember when you do this screenplay, he isn't a saint. You know, and so it was an invitation to do a very three-dimensional portrait of this man, and I hope that sort of came through.
Okay, next question? Yes, you're waving, standing.
What did Stephen Hawking think about the film?
He only saw it very recently, and he's very heavy, and we couldn't get him into the cinema because he was too heavy for the ramps. So I suggested to about 5 of us that we pick up his chair, and my God, it took about all our energy to get him in position. And he said before it began, because Eric did a very gracious and articulate explanation that this is an imagining of your life. We weren't there, so go with us. And he simply said elegantly, I understand what you have to do. We ran the movie, and I will never forget when the lights came on, a nurse was wiping a tear from his cheek, and he said, I think his exact words were, broadly true. And we'll take that. Broadly true will do us.
Just a question for the producers on the stage. Maybe you could each share a story about what it was like to bring this film together from your perspective.
You know, it's an interesting project because it was more about, I think, working with Anthony on the script and getting Jane, because it was based on her book, comfortable with the idea of a movie being made about their lives. That was why it took so long, because she was resistant and scared for all the obvious reasons. And it was hard for her to trust that process. So Anthony bought her a lot of sherry, many pots of tea, and then I came in and we started the process of really trying to get the rights from her, and Anthony kept working with all his sweat equity on the script, and you can give this man any note and he makes it better, so that was wonderful. And then once we had the rights and the script, we went out to James to direct, and the reason we got very excited about him was because we thought his documentary background actually helped a lot, because he was used to making, obviously, a very poignant movie about real-life characters in Man on Wire. And that was what we had, and then there were many people that wanted to make this movie, and our number one place to go was Working Title, and just kept saying to Eric, this is the place we want to make the movie, and he said within, like, I don't know, it probably took you 30 seconds to say you're going to make this movie. And that was a really fast, wonderful experience, but you should have something.
Well, I mean, the exciting thing for me, or for all of us at Working Title, is working with talent like this and seeing James make this film and these guys develop into unbelievable actors expressing themselves with these two characters. And of course, we love the story, but it's been a fantastic journey. And I have to just tell you two, you're wonderful.
There's one more thing I wanted to say in relation to what Stephen said when he saw the film. Because when we made the film, when you hear his synthesized voice, we were using a mocked-up version, a sort of approximation of what his voice was. And for me, the most amazing thing was after he saw the film, he gave us the right to use his real voice. And so what you hear in the film is actually Stephen's voice, and that was perhaps the greatest compliment that we got.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions, just on the aisle here.
The theme music was very moving. Could you say something about it, please?
Sorry, what was
The composer is here, Johan Johansson. Maybe you should stand up and make himself known to us. The only thing to add to that is the idea was to explore the story through music, not to kind of underscore it. And that's what Johan did so beautifully, was to investigate the emotional complexity in the story, not just to garnish it with a kind of varnish. So that's what I wanted him to do, and I think he did it so well. So thank you, Johan.
All right, one last question. Wave your hand high. Okay, go for it.
Hi, as a neuroscience graduate, I was really looking forward to seeing it. So, a question for Eddie: how was that experience for you, like portraying someone with a motor neuron disease?
The woman that asked the question, she's a neuroscience student, so she wanted to know what it was like for you to play someone with a disease.
Do you know what? It was extraordinary. We spent 6 months going to motor neuron clinics, one specifically in London. Motor neuron disease is ALS, as I'm sure you guys all know. And we worked with a doctor called Dr. Katie Seidel, and we met maybe 40 or 50 people suffering from motor neuron disease. We then took photos of Stephen, because there's no footage of Stephen when he was younger, but there are photos. And so it was almost like an investigation. We took photos of Stephen to Dr. Seidel, who then started piecing together what she thought his decline would have been. I then worked with a dancer, a choreographer, an amazing woman called Alex Reynolds, who helped find that decline and place that in my body. But the people and the patients that we met and their families, Fliss met with many of the families, were incredibly generous. And as we were saying earlier, someone describes the disease as being living in a prison with the prison walls getting smaller every day. And for that reason, every hour is a week, every week is a month, every month is a year. And that idea of living every minute to the full, that is what I gleaned from this film, and what Stephen, for me, that is the icon of hope. And all the patients we met had a similar optimism. And so it was a riveting experience and very inspiring.
Okay, well, I think we're all inspired and riveted as well. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much.